chances are, if you are watching this now, you're also probably a podcaster, just because most of the world has a podcast at this point. Ned, a lot of podcasters have problems. You have a solution to one of those problems.
Yeah, this is a tip for all of you podcasters out there who are also trying to make your editors happier / make a better podcast. The tip is simply this. Always practice leaving a tiny bit of space between you and the person you're talking to. Let everyone talk in the clear so that the editing of your show is quicker, easier, faster. If people are cross-talking, then you have to do a lot of editing to remove the crosstalk. You should practice that. When you're recording your podcast, try leaving a quick second of pause between the two of you that your editor will edit out later, but will make it a much easier edit in the long run.
You'll also notice that I was about to jump in with something, Ned, but I decided to wait until you were finished because that makes for an easier edit.
I appreciate that as the editor of daily tips that may or may not help you. We will see you all tomorrow for another tip. Arielle, you and I recently appeared on a podcast that might release after this episode comes out, but something got said during that podcast that blew my mind, and you've made it today's tip. How can I have better, hard conversations with people that I'm talking to?
Ned, what a wonderful question. When we were on this podcast, which we'll link to in the show notes, potentially if that episode is out by now, and if not, we'll just link to the show in general. Somebody said, define terms before you have a conversation. And really, we were referring to talking about media and podcasting because there's so many different ways to define so many different things. And I often find that when I'm having conversations with people, especially clients, we're talking about different things, even though we're using the same words. So we came to, why don't we just define things up at the top of our conversation before we even get to the meat of it so that we're not confused once we do start discussing the nitty-gritty. And I think this applies to more than just, professionalism and having conversations about industries, but also like relationship talks. How are you defining this? How are you defining vacation? How are you defining alone time? Things like that.
I have a challenge for the Tippendales out there who do podcasts. Define the word producer before you ever tell people you do it. That's
a really good point. That's a really good point.
What does it mean?
No one knows. And another big one is networks, a media network. No one knows what network means.
No.
But you know what? I do know what it means. We're
so
back tomorrow with another episode of Daily Tips that may or may not help you. This time, we are going to have on Noah, our guest tipper of the month. Happy Tuesday. See you tomorrow.
It's Wednesday, it's May 14th, and we are back with our guest tipper of the month, Noah Westreich. Noah, hello, welcome back, and what's the tip for the day?
So our tip for today has to do with being mindful when you drink your coffee, although really it could be being mindful over anything that you drink in the morning. As a rabbi, I like to say blessings throughout the day to sort of ground myself and to schedule gratitude into my life and into my day. And the blessing I say after drinking my first sip of coffee is not at all traditional or customary. It's something that I've repurposed from our prayer book. As Reformed Jews, we cut out the blessing for blessing God for resurrecting the dead, just because it's not part of our worldview or our sensibilities. We basically say, resurrection of the dead, we don't believe in that. We don't need to pray about that. But I didn't want to leave the blessing on the cutting room floor. I thought it could be repurposed. And so I've repurposed the resurrection blessing to go immediately after my first sip of coffee. So in the morning, I'll drink my first sip of coffee. And I'll say, Baruch atah Adonai mechayeh metim. Blessed are you, God, who resurrects the dead.
That's good.
That is good.
That's really good. Noah, you are actually the person who introduced me to coffee, so that means a lot to me to know now how you take it every morning.
Yes, that's how I take it.
What does that mean?
He's the first person in our first job after college who convinced me that I should drink coffee.
Oh.
And he was, it was mostly because it allowed us to go and take a break. And we were very into fancy coffee. So we would be like kind of snotty about like the coffee that we'd buy and how we'd make it and everything.
Yeah.
Still are.
I was that job and every job since, I've sort of been the coffee guy in the office, and starting with that job. And our job was to travel around to different towns and cities across the United States South. And we would always seek out the best and the fanciest coffee everywhere we went. And we even had a short-lived hashtag. It was a movement, actually. Remember it? Remember, Arielle?
I do. Proper coffee culture.
Proper coffee culture. Yeah.
So, Noah, you mentioned very briefly that you're a rabbi, and we didn't get much more into that right now, but we did this past weekend when we dropped an episode on this feed that's an entire interview with you. So if you are interested, Tippendales, in learning more about Noah and in what he does for a living, please go and check out that episode. And also stick around because we're back tomorrow with another tip, me and Ned, that is. And then we're back next week, me, Noah, and Ned, with more tips from our guest tipper.
Yay.
The thing about Daily Tips that may or may not help you, the show that we are hosting, we being Arielle and Ned, is that this show comes from a template. And Ned, today you have a tip that will help us understand how to use templates more in life to make our lives more efficient. So Ned, how do you solve the email time suck?
Great question. I send a lot of emails, as I'm sure everyone listening to or watching this episode does, and the biggest problem I have is the amount of emails I send that are the exact same email over and over and over again, day after day, year after year, month after month. Those weren't in order. Don't worry about it. The solve is this. As soon as I realize I've sent an email 3 or more times in my life, I save that email to a note as a template so that I can copy and paste it later and not have to type it out again. Keep notes on your phone. If you use certain email clients, they can have templates built in. However you do it, save templates of things you send a lot. For instance, I'm an actor. I am constantly submitting my materials for consideration by theaters and films and whatever. The email I send is exactly the same every time, but by copying and pasting that email rather than typing it out, I'm saving myself like 2 to 5 minutes per email. And I looked last year, I sent 700 of them. So do that math really fast and you can see the time save that I have done over time. This applies to if you are a podcaster and you send out blasts about your podcast. This applies to if you are at work and you send a weekly roundup of things. Anything that is a consistent email you send a lot, turn it into a template so that you can copy and paste and just fill in what matters and save yourself a lot of time. That is the tip for today.
And when you say make it a template, if you use Gmail, you can actually do this within Gmail. And a lot of the other email service providers also have systems that allow you to do this. And if you use something that is an add-on like HubSpot, I believe you can even set it up that you start typing something and your email understands that that is the start of a template, so it autofills. There's a lot of really cool ways to do this.
Templates will save you so much time, and email is absolutely the most efficient way to communicate with people, but also absolutely the biggest time suck in a workday.
And that's how you solve the email time suck on Daily Tips that may or may not help you. We're back tomorrow with another tip that may or may not suck your time.
Arielle, I have been burned one too many times by people who share my business because I'm a trusting person. Do you have a tip to help me figure this out a little bit?
I do. This is a tip that I call be careful or be wary, whatever. When people volunteer that they are such a good friend or they're so great at keeping secrets when no one asked, I think those people are trouble. It's great if you're a good friend. It's great if you're good at keeping secrets. But I don't think that great friends and people who are great at keeping secrets shout those things. So today's tip is just to be careful of that. I think it's a phrase that we hear pretty often that we're not skeptical enough about.
I would like to add to this that you should be skeptical of anyone who calls themselves an ally or calls themselves an organizer or calls themselves a thought leader.
Thought leader for sure.
You do not get to announce yourself as a thing. Other people get to decide that for you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's a good way of rounding it all out. I think that there are a few more terms that probably fit into this. So Tippendales, throw them in the comments of this episode wherever you're watching or listening. We'd love to know what are you.
We would love to know.
We'd love to know
what you can't call yourself, but other people can bestow upon you.
Yeah, that's a good one. We're trying these more call to action episodes, so let us know what you think. And with that, happy weekend. We're back next week. And when we come back next week, you guessed it, more tips that may or may not help you.